What if we were known more for what we love instead of what we hate? Would that make a difference? What if we spent more time loving people and less time being angry with them? Would that make a difference? What if we gave unconditionally of our time, our talent, and our treasures? Would that make a difference? What if we shared the difference Jesus has made in our lives and stopped pushing away those who aren't there yet? Would that make a difference? What if we walked in the steps of our Savior, sitting with the broken, caring for the poor, loving the lost? Would that make a difference? We live in the midst of ruins, surrounded by brokenness, pain, and loss. It's a moment made for us, a calling we were created to answer, not with judgment, not with harsh words or self-righteousness, but with love, the love of Jesus. What if the church acted like the church? Would that make a difference?
So the title of my sermon for today is called Undeserved. Undeserved. So my question for you today is, how do you often respond when you get hurt from doing something that is good? How do you often respond when you get hurt from doing something that is good? So today, that's what we are going to be talking about. How should we respond when we get hurt from doing something good? Or to rephrase it, how do you respond? Should we respond to undeserved consequences? Responding to hurts we don't deserve. There are two types of consequences in life. First type of consequence is the deserved consequence. Deserved consequence. Example. You're driving 70 kilometers per hour in Manggahan. In a subdivision that is narrow. 70 kilometers per hour. And then, because you're driving too fast, like Mission Impossible, you crash and you hit someone. Now you end up in the hospital. Deserve. You deserved it. Because first of all, you shouldn't be driving that fast in Manggahan. The next type of consequence, undeserved consequence. Undeserved. Now you're walking down the street. You're going to buy ulam. You're going to buy food for your brothers and sisters. And then suddenly a motor hits you. 70 kilometers per hour. It hits you. Undeserved. Because you were doing something good, but then you end up getting hurt in return. So this reminded me of a story this reminded me of what happened a few weeks ago. It was with a good friend of mine, Meg. He's our sound guy. So one day Meg was hanging around in YMC, and then he saw a little kitten on a roof of a car. So the kitten was clearly distressed, and it was calling for help because beneath the car were two dogs. It was Nila and Honey. And Nila and Honey were waiting for her, for the cat to fall. Because, when it does, we know what happens. So, with nowhere for the kitten to escape, Meg decided to help the poor thing and place it to safety. But upon holding her, the cat panicked and began scratching and screaming, and as a result, his hand got bitten. He bled and spent the next few weeks going back and forth to the hospital to get vaccinated. So upon helping, he got hurt in return. Doesn't stuff like this happen in our lives? You tried to help, you had good intentions, but upon helping, we got hurt or we hurt other people in the process. You get betrayed, disrespected, ridiculed, harmed. So how should we How should we respond when we do good and receive bad consequences? How should we respond when we get hurt from doing something good? Here are a few examples. When you spent all your savings for your crush, for your MU, you buy flowers, you buy chocolates, and you take them to school every day. Oh, sweet. And then in the end, they say, we can't continue like this anymore. I have to prioritize my studies. Study first. Study first. After a few weeks, he discovered them hanging around with someone else already. You look at Facebook and you see she's already in a relationship. What do you do? What should you do? How do we respond? Another example, when you're trying to help a friend group, so that they would be in good terms because they had conflict. You had good Hello, check mic test. You had good intentions. You wanted to be a peacemaker. You wanted to represent Jesus. And then, that friend group, they start making rumors about you. Chismis, rumors. And then, what do? How should you respond? When you've been working so hard in your job, you've been doing your best, you've contributed immensely to the company, and then you get fired from that job or terminated because they're downsizing. How should you respond? When you are a parent, a mother or a father, and you spent the entirety of your life sacrificing for your children's future, every day you work, you give them everything they need to the best of your abilities, and now you see them throwing their lives away to vices and alcohol. And you can't even ask them to wash the dishes because they'll get angry at you. What do? How should we respond? When you're a son or a daughter, and you've been trying so hard to make your parents proud, you've invested a lot you wanted to make them proud, and instead of appreciating you, they compare you to others. They laugh at you, or maybe even criticize you, telling you that what you're doing is dumb or nonsense. What do? How should you respond? Now, when you're a cell group leader, last example, when you're a cell group leader, and you've been sharing God's word to your disciples, you've invested a lot in their growth. Then you see your disciples going back to their previous life, going back to a cycle. How should you respond? What do you do? How should we respond to undeserved consequences or undeserved pain? Here are some common responses I'd like to share. First response, what did I do to deserve this? What did I do to deserve this? I just wanted to help. I had good intentions. What did I do wrong? Second, maybe I do deserve this. Maybe I do deserve this. Maybe this is just my fate. Maybe I do deserve to be alone or be betrayed. Maybe God is angry with me. Maybe I'm experiencing these things because of what I did in the past. Maybe I do deserve this. Third, we push people away. I can't trust anyone anymore. I've been hurt before. I can't possibly trust anyone ever again because they've hurt me. Last, we blame God. Lord, why did you let this happen to me? I've been faithful to you. I've been going to church every Sunday. I've been reading your word. I've been serving. How could you let this happen to me? This kind of mentality has led many to self-sabotage. They go down to a downward spiral in their lives. So it's important to ask the question, why do we receive undeserved consequences? Why? The answer is simple, and it may even sound like an excuse, but it is something that we have to accept as a reality in our world. Why do we receive undeserved consequences? It is because we live in a fallen and broken world. We live in a fallen and broken world. We live in a world where evil and sin exists. There is an enemy whose main objective is to lead you to your downfall. And it will use people and circumstances to lead you to your downfall. In Ephesians 6 verse 12, it says here, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers and authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." In another version, it says, "We are not fighting against humans, but against forces and authorities and against rulers of darkness." The enemy is going to be using people, circumstances in your life for you to fall and drag you away from God. Drag you away from God. So what is important is how we respond. What is important is how we respond. So there was once an abusive father. And this father had two twins. He had two sons and they were twins. So he was an alcoholic, and every time he went home, he would beat up his children. When they grew up, one of the twins became an alcoholic. He became violent and aggressive, and he would regularly beat up his children and spouse. When he was asked why he was like this, he said, "Because my father abused me when I was a kid, and this is what I always knew." The other twin was the complete opposite. He was kind, he was gentle, he had a pure heart. He was a blessing to those around him. He never hurt anyone and is always considerate. When he was asked why he was like that, he answered, "My father abused me when I was a kid. I don't want to be like him. I don't want people to experience what I have experienced from him." The twins had similar experiences. They had the same father. Both of them went through the same abuse. They had the same difficulty. But they had very different responses. Why? They had very different responses. Why was it? Because they had very different perspectives. The way you respond to certain situations is based on this perspective, your perspective towards it. The way you respond to certain situations is based on your perspective towards it. So today, I'll be sharing to you some biblical perspectives on how we should respond when we experience undeserved consequences or undeserved pain. So to be clear, we can respond in many ways. There are many responses as to how, when we receive undeserved consequences. There are many things written in the Bible about how we should respond. But today, I'm going to be talking about three things. Some of them, just three things. Since these are the ones God has revealed to me and He has put in my heart that relates to the circumstances I've faced during the past couple of weeks. So the first response is, be reminded that God knows what you're going through and that He is in control. Be reminded that God knows what you're going through and He is in control. Jesus knows how you feel. We have heard this a lot of times in preachings, on social media. Jesus knows how you feel. He understands how you feel. And it is a pretty obvious fact for me. Until one day, Dad went home and he shared to me a conversation he had with a guy he met. The guy said, "How could Jesus possibly know what I'm going through? He never had a wife. And he never experienced marital separation in his time. How could he possibly know what I'm going through?" And upon hearing this, I was taken aback. It was a weird question, but it was valid. How could Jesus possibly know what this person was going through? Then I am reminded that God calls His church His bride. I am reminded that God calls me His beloved. And even though he calls me his beloved, I am reminded of the times I rejected him. I ran away from him. So if you think Jesus doesn't understand what being rejected and being separated from the people he loves, you are mistaken. Rejection and separation, it's not foreign to him. Some might say he never had taxes. Never had taxes. There were no loan sharks in the past. He doesn't know what I'm going through. How could he possibly know the pressure of having to pay a huge amount of debt, amount of money, and be crippled in debt? Believe it or not, I actually owe someone 100,000 pesos. Thank you. So a couple of weeks ago, can you please show a picture? There you go. There it is. A couple of weeks ago, Rian and I were going to Antipolo. We were going to Antipolo Simbahan. It was a place near us. And we were going to eat Anli rice in Mang Inasal. So on our way there, a brand new Mitsubishi Expander suddenly stopped right in front of us. And then bam, I left a dent on his car. So I left a big dent on his brand new Mitsubishi Expander 2023 edition. Shucks. So we went to the police station to file a report. We went there. And a few days later, I was sent an estimate of the cost of the repairs. It was 105,000 pesos. Oh my gosh, yeah. So right there and then, I could have said, Lord, how could you possibly know what I'm going through? You never hit an expander with a motor that has faulty brakes. You never have to pay a huge amount of money. So you don't know the pressure of having to pay a huge amount of debt. I could have thought of that. That could have been my mindset. But then I am reminded that yes, Jesus may not have felt the pressure of having to pay for car repairs, but he most definitely felt the pressure of having to pay for the debt of my sins. And the sins for everyone in this room, and for the sins of everyone outside this room. Oh, he felt the pressure from the very moment he was born to his very last breath. He felt it. He was deemed crazy by his siblings. He was called a spawn of Satan for healing a blind, mute, and possessed man. He was sold to Judas. He was sold by Judas to be killed. He was abandoned by Peter when he was being persecuted. When it comes to undeserved consequences, no one knows it better than Jesus. In Hebrews 4 verse 15, it's a translation of J.B. Phillips. It says here, "For we have no superhuman high priest to whom our weaknesses are unknown." Superhuman high priest, Jesus, to whom our weaknesses are not known or unintelligible. He himself has shared fully in all our experience of temptation, except that he never sinned. It says here, he himself, not an angel, not an ambassador, not a replacement. He himself has shared, has fully shared fully, not partially, not to some degree, but fully in all our experience. Every hurt, every ache, all our stress, there are no exceptions. He suffered our pain. He suffered our pain. He felt our fears when he came here on earth. Why did he have to go through it? Why did Jesus have to go through persecution after persecution? And there's this writing in Max Lucado's book, In the Eye of the Storm, that summarizes it all and has the perfect explanation for me. It says here, rejection, he felt it. Jesus felt it. Temptation, he knew it. Loneliness, he experienced it. Death, he tasted it. And stress, he could write the best-selling book about it. Why did he do it? One reason. so that when you hurt, you will go to Him. So that when you hurt, you will go to Him. So again, going back to it, hallelujah. Hello? Yeah. Sorry for the technical difficulties, guys. Yeah. So, again, going back to the first response, why did He do? God knows what you're going through and that He is in control. God is in control. I am reminded of the time we went to Tacloban. There's a picture right over there. I am reminded of the time we went to Tacloban for a mission trip after the Super Typhoon Yolanda. And this was 10 years ago, and I was 13 years old back then. So we were here in Manila, and we saved up some money to go there to help. And to go there, we had to ride this huge plane, a C-130. It is a cargo plane, and I guess that's like the only available option during that time to go there. So this was during the Typhoon Yolanda. Anyways, we were riding this plane, and every time the plane entered a cloud, there would be turbulence, and the plane would shake. Yeah. And at first, this would scare me. But the more it happened, the less I became afraid. Because I knew that every time there would be turbulence, every time we entered a cloud, we would always safely come out to the other side. Every time it happened, the more it became apparent to me that the pilot was in control and that he knew what he was doing. Yes, there was a bit of fear in my part. There was discomfort. There was a little bit of pain in my ears because of the pressure. But if the pilot didn't go through the turbulence, we wouldn't have landed in our destination on time. I may have not seen the pilot controlling the plane, but I did not have to see him in order for me to know that he was there. Is God the pilot of your life? In Jeremiah 29 verse 11, it says here, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in a future." When God said, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, does this mean I'm exempted from feeling pain? Does this mean I'm exempted from undergoing or experiencing trials or from undeserved harm? No, you will definitely go through them 100%. But do not be afraid. It says here in 1 Corinthians verse 10-13, no trial has overtaken you that is not faced by others. All the trials that you're facing, they have been faced by everyone. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tried beyond what you are able to bear. But with the trial, He will also provide a way out so that you may be able to endure it. We as Christians should expect that trials will come our way. You may have deserved it, or you may have not deserved it. Trials will come your way. No doubt about it. But God will provide for you a way out. You will go through and beyond these trials, these turbulences, these clouds, not because of your might, but because He is in control. Not because of how big your faith is, but because of His faithfulness. Second response. Think, what would Jesus do? We've heard this a lot of times. If you call yourself a Christian, you are a representative of Jesus. Jesus is seen in you in whatever you do. When you are dealt with undeserved consequences or pains, ask yourself, what would Jesus do? Years ago, my lola was walking down the street. This was when I was like 6 or 7 years old, I don't remember. But one day, she was walking down the street when our drunk neighbor released this Rottweiler. There's a picture there. You know that big dog? So our drunk neighbor released that dog. And the dog was big, and since our neighbor was drunk, he didn't think about the consequences that would happen. The dog saw my Lola and it bit her. My Lola screamed and she cried and she was taken to the hospital to get vaccinated. So our drunk neighbor, this is what happened. Our drunk neighbor, instead of helping my Lola for the payments, he told my dad, call the officials and let's see what happens. I dare you to call them. The audacity of this guy. If you know my dad, he's the sweetest guy in the world. Absolutely. He didn't call the officials. He and my mom paid for the treatment. And instead of suing the guy, instead of making the guy pay, you know what he did? He would bring him food to his house regularly. And a few months later, a knock was heard on the door. And there was this guy, this drunk guy. He was not drunk anymore. He was not drunk, but he was broken. He began crying and opening up and sharing his problems to my parents. A lot of burdens and bitterness was released from him that day because my dad thought, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? And during that time, he came to know who Jesus was. In Romans 12, verse 17 to 21, it says here, do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Next, if your enemy is it right? Yeah. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. Next. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals in his head. And last verse it says here, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. When Jesus fed the 5,000, he knew each and everyone's story. In each of those persons, he knew their stories. He knew who they were. Yes, Jesus was human, but he was also completely God. Completely human, completely God. He knew what they were going through. He knew their mistakes. He knew their sins. He knew the people they've hurt in the past and the people they will be hurting in the future. He knows their sins. And he probably knew that maybe some of those people, will be shouting, crucify, crucify, when he would stand in trial. He knew that he would be left behind by them when he was crucified. He knew all of this. But what did he do? He healed them, and he fed them. Do you know what Jesus did? Do you know what Jesus did when he was about to experience this undeserved pain of being persecuted and nailed to the cross? In the Garden of Gethsemane, this was his prayer. Luke 22, verse 42, it says, Father, if you are willing, take this cup, take this burden from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done. Lord, not my will, but yours be done. We know that trials will come our way. We will be receiving a lot of pain and a lot of disappointment in this life. Is this your response? Is this your response? Lord, not my will, but yours be done. When he was nailed to the cross, you know what he said? He said, Lord, forgive them. Last response, part 3. There you go. Remember, your trials will become your testimony. Hallelujah. Your trials will become your testimony. The undeserved consequences that we face in this life are trials that God has allowed to happen in our life. And again, it is not for the sake of harming you. Those trials are not for the sake of harming you. But God uses it as a part of His plan to lead you to His promises. For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, to give you hope and a future. those trials that you are facing right now will someday become a testament and become a reminder of God's faithfulness in your life. And one, God will use your story for others to know Him and accept Him. When God, this is a story I am reminded of this. When God promised Joseph, you know who Joseph is? Not your neighbor, not your classmate. Joseph in the Bible, Joseph the dreamer. When God promised Joseph that through a vision that he will be leading a nation in the future, he had to go through several undeserved consequences. His brothers attempted to murder him because of jealousy. He was sold to Egypt to become a slave. He was falsely accused by the wife of his master, and he was sent to jail for 2 years because of that. But in the end, he became the right hand of the Pharaoh. But going through that, imagine the fear. Imagine the embarrassment of being sold to a different country as a slave. Imagine the pain, the sadness of going through that. But through all that happened to him, through everything that happened to him, all the trials he has faced, you know what the Bible said? It said, the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. And whatever Joseph did, God was with him. In the hurts he felt, the Lord was with him. The Lord is with you right now. Don't you ever forget that. You know what the truth is? The truth is, Joseph wouldn't have become the right hand of the Pharaoh if he hadn't gone through what he had to go through. It had to happen so that he and his entire family, and also the entire nation of Israel, would be saved from the drought that was about to come. What God has done to you, your testimony, your story, could just have the power to save someone's life. So may I call on the worship team? To make this more spiritual. Okay. So the question is, why do we receive undeserved consequences? Let's go back to that first question. Why do we receive undeserved consequences? And the answer is because God is refining you. God is refining you. For you, it does not look good. It does not even feel good. But it is for our good. God is using it to refine you, to make you look more like Jesus. In John 15 verse 2, it says here, He takes away any branch in me that does not give fruit. Any branch that gives fruit, He cuts it back so it will give more fruit. In James, the cutting, the pruning, the molding, it will not feel comfortable. But like a plant, He has to cut away our mindsets, our habits, our impulses, our addictions, our anger issues, our pride, so that we will bear more fruit in the future. In James 1, verse 2 to 4, it says here, Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. You may have been discouraged during the past couple of weeks. Hurt, disappointed, abused. You may have deserved it, or you may have not deserved it. But the truth is, God's love is present even in the midst of your problems. His love is present. Again, we know that trials will come. Trials will come. It will come. So this is what I will always say. It is better to face it together with God than to go through it alone, and getting lost along the way. It is better to face it together with God than going through it alone and getting lost along the way. So these things that we have talked about, these 3 responses I shared to you today, to be completely honest, it is impossible for you to do. Impossible. What was the first one? First response? God knows what you're going through and that He's in control, that you should remember it. Think, what would Jesus do? Third response is, what was it again? Trials. Remember that your trials will be your testimony. It is impossible for you to do. Impossible. It is impossible if you don't know who Jesus is. It is impossible for you to know who Jesus is if you don't have a relationship with Him. Because how will you know what would Jesus do if you don't know what He did? So it starts with having a relationship with Him. So may I please invite everyone to stand up and talk to God today on what He wants to share to you. Hallelujah.